And so it is. Welcome to React State Management, syntax, and just kind of like, we're going to stay in review-y kind of land a little bit. So let's see, I'm trying to think of the best way to approach this. How's about, I'm going to pull up the that restaurant code from earlier, but I'm going to go back to the class syntax. Let me go grab that. Okay, for anybody who was in the hooks lesson, this was our hooks app, and we had switched all of this class stuff over to functions. Magical. All right, let's go back to classes for a sec. So I'm going to take a look at the git log. Getting classy was commit 313E. So I'm going to get checkout 313E, and there we go. All right, back with the class. So let's talk a little bit about what's going on here. And let's start with that. Can somebody tell me what's happening on that line? Break it down. Go for it, Alice.
For the line one, right?
Mm-hmm.
You import the React from the React because it's be able to use the JSX in the file. And then you use the curly bracket and components because you use the class component.
Good. So I want to break this down a little bit further than that even. So this all by itself is called a default export. So when we do something like export default app, this is an export default from the React node module. In fact, we can take a look at it. Oh shoot, it won't let me go in. Let's try this. Okay, so this is the code for React. Module.exports. That's what's called a default export using CommonJS. It's just like export default. So that's one way we can do that. Also, we're taking in a named export from React like that. So what that looks like is instead of, we can export more than one thing. We can have a default export. I can also like, I can also make a function. I could do something like that. And then in another file, I can import I can do something like that. Change the words. Named exports, that's what those are. So the default export for React has all those things on it, we can do React.component. We can do React.useState, React.useEffect. They all hang off of that default export also. And we can import them in separately. Questions about default exports? Cool. Now this one's a little bit different. We don't assign it to anything. And it's a CSS file. That's kind of weird. That works through the magic of Webpack. Webpack is something that Create React App sets up for us. And allows us to do things like import images, import CSS files. The core idea in Webpack is it treats everything like JavaScript, even binary files like images and stuff, and allow you to like save them in variables and pass them around and all that kind of stuff. And then when you build the app, it figures out where all those files need to go and what the paths for them are and that kind of stuff. It's pretty cool. But what we need to know is that in any of our components, we can just do this. We can import a CSS file, and then it'll, if we want to split stuff up into different files, we can do that. Questions about that? Sick. All right, so how about that line? That's kind of an interesting one. Blake, what's happening on that line?
You're basically defining that file as a class and using the React component from React.
Yep. So think about, I want to hear the word inheritance when we're talking about this. App inherits from component. So this is like in Ruby, this would have been like that. But we get all of the methods and all of the state and all the other shit that's on the component class. We get that, and then we can add to it. Cool. This. So I think an easy thing to get mixed up on with React syntax is treating it like an object, because we're opening with the curly brace. And so you kind of naturally want to do something like that. Or treating it like a function body, where we could do something like that. Classes are different. That's how you declare a property on a class. No const, no let, no var. Just say it and then say what it's equal to. Now, because JavaScript is magical, we can also set those things equal to functions. Also, we can use that syntax. That's called method shorthand. That's just like that and that are the same thing. For the stuff that you write yourself, you should pretty much always use the fat arrow syntax. For lifecycle methods like component did mount and render, use the method shorthand. But you can also use fat arrow syntax with those. Questions about that?
Hey, Kyle, can I ask a question about inheritance?
Yeah, please do.
So if something inherits from app, do they also get all the inheritances from component as well?
They would, but don't do that. You don't want your components to inherit from other components, but if they did, that would absolutely work. It's a hierarchy. So you get all of the things that you're inheriting from, including anything that they inherited.
Wait, so why should you always use the anonymous function thing?
Ah, great question. So glad you asked. Because it keeps this context for you. We talked about this briefly yesterday in one of the lessons. I don't want to get too far into it because this is the single most confusing thing in JavaScript, and like not for any good reason. It's not powerful. It doesn't like open any new doors for you. It's just JavaScript was made in 10 days, and the corners had to be cut somewhere, and that was fucking one of them. So the problem happens if I have thing 1, thing 2, thing 3, thing 4. Cool. So in Ruby, I could do something like self.thing2, or in JavaScript, this.thing2. And if thing2 calls this.thing3, and this calls this.thing4, and this does something, you'd expect that to work like exactly the way it looks like it should work. All right, that looks up that, that looks up that, that looks up that. But JavaScript isn't an OOP language. It's not designed to work that way. And so what ends up happening is thing 1 calls this, but by this function, this isn't referring to the instance of the class anymore. It's certainly not there. It's referring to the function that called it. This, that's like, that's defined on the function, not on the instance of that class. And if you're like, holy shit, that's really confusing. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's why like they never should have put classes in JavaScript. It's such a bad idea. And it's why like React is getting rid of them and going to hooks and all that kind of shit. So the way that you can get around that is by using fat arrows. If all of these did that, this context stays the same every time. Works exactly the way it looks like it should. That's the one thing that fat arrows do that regular functions don't.
Oh, that's really weird.
Yeah, yes it is. You can have a happy and productive career as a JavaScript developer and like never use this. If you want to go down the rabbit hole and find out what the 8 different definitions of this are, MDM's got some pretty good reading. And the like definitive thing on the topic is Kyle Simpson's book on it, which I believe is called This in Prototypes. It's short, it's like 80 pages, and is very thorough and very wonky. So if you do want to figure out all of the different nuances of this keyword, that's the book. And you can read it free online too. Cool. We've got a lifecycle method here. Lifecycle method, these only exist on classes. Functions don't have the concept of a lifecycle method, only classes. So there's two reasons why we'd have to use a class over a function. One is we want to use state. The other is we want to use a lifecycle method. Otherwise, use a function or hooks. Cool. So this render method, render is also a lifecycle method. It's the only one that's required to be in a class component. What a lot of people don't realize, you can declare variables in here. So that's usually a little bit nicer than something like get list of Pokemon and then fat arrowing it. And do all these same things. Like you probably have written code like that before. What sucks about it though is you have to write get list of Pokemon and then invoke it. That's always felt kind of gross to me. So you can do that instead. It's an option. Questions so far? Okay, there's one other idea that I want to hit on because it's in the code challenge. And it's this idea of containers. So the purpose of a container is to separate state from stuff that, stateful stuff from non-stateful stuff. So I could make a class called dog container. And then I can make a function called dog. And this thing's render method is going to return a dog. And whether or not it's sitting right now. So then this functional component, it just gets whether or not it's sitting as a prop, and I can destructure it. The purpose of doing this container thing, oops, is that state is complicated and expensive. So these dumb components aren't. Something that just does whatever it gets told to do, that's way simple. And so we want to separate that stuff out from the stateful logic. And so you'll see this pattern a lot in the React world. So then the thing you actually render is the dog container, but it renders the dog for you. Questions about containers?
So containers are, I don't know, I'm trying to word it.
Separate stateful stuff from not stateful stuff.
Hmm.
Because we could do this entire thing just in the container. And do like this dot state dot is sitting. This is a pattern for getting, for being able to split out the stateful parts from the not stateful parts, which is what that does. Other questions about containers? That's it. Cool. Thank you very much. Go make some apps.